My name is Marge Bruchac. I'm the 2011-2012 Katrin H. Lamon Fellow here at SAR.
Marge, would you tell us, first of all, what your experiences at SAR has been like?
It's really been remarkable to be surrounded by such a supportive community of scholars. There are people here who are doing projects that may not be at all similar to mine, but it's really inspiring to work with them, to talk with them, to hear what they're doing, to find these unusual interdisciplinary connections. And also people are just so supportive and so collegial. So not only is it a break from the routine of everyday academic work, but I feel like I've made enormous progress this year, and not just in terms of the on-the-ground getting work done, but in terms of the intellectual connections and the insights and the inspiration. And even in my own work, there are insights that come from hearing other people's projects, but there are also ways in which my own work has evolved as a result of being here. And I found unexpected connections that I really had not known how these would fit into the project, but they were just perfect when they appeared. My project is titled Consorting with Savages, Indigenous Informants and American Anthropologists, and it specifically looks at the social relations and interconnections between individuals who served as gatekeepers for their native communities and particular anthropologists who came into those communities hoping to collect data, whether it was material or oral traditions or archaeological materials. And the premise is that these native gatekeepers were not simple, naive informants. They took a very, very active role in not only mediating access, but also in contributing to the intellectual project of anthropology as we know it. So many of these theories and methods that emerged came about because of these partnerships and really grew out of these unusual partnerships. And in many cases, Native people also tried to conceal certain kinds of information. So we often imagine that anthropologists were collecting something that was vanishing, that was doomed to be lost, that was somehow about to be separated from living communities. But in fact, those living communities had their own concepts of how they might be able to use this anthropological project. Sometimes they were damaged by it, but sometimes they were assisted by it. When I started the project, it started actually as a form of repatriation. I call it reverse ethnography. So I'm looking back and trying to reconstruct how those relationships emerged and how Native communities viewed anthropologists. So instead of just looking from the outside in, from the anthropological perspective, I wanted to see how Native communities and Native individuals gazed out at these foreign strangers. So the word savages is a very interesting sobriquet that kind of cuts both ways. When I think about the impact of this project, I'm finding that already it's energizing many of the Native communities that I work with to learn that their ancestors were instrumental in developing this intellectual project that we call anthropology. That anthropology was not some alien concept, but it was some way of capturing and preserving important forms of knowledge that were incredibly useful at the time and are useful now. So for instance, in many Native communities, there are digital repatriation projects going on where people are now hearing the voices of those ancestors who spoke to those anthropologists, and they're learning something different than what was collected. They're taking part in a conversation that stopped at a certain moment in time, but that conversation is being reanimated. And so I think a project like this restores those indigenous voices. It restores a certain level of respect to Native people who were part of this project. It also changes the way we think about anthropological knowledge. So it's not just mediated through prominent, mostly white male scientists, but it's mediated through these very intricate and sometimes very intimate relations that shape the kinds of data that emerge. And one of the parts of this research that's closest to my heart is Bertha Parker, as you know. And when I originally drafted the book proposal, I was challenged by reviewers to create a Southwestern case because most of my expertise is in the Northeast. And at the time, they were suggesting that I find a prominent female Southwestern anthropologist and perhaps her interactions with male Native Americans, and something about that just seemed so gender specific and so limiting, and I convinced the publisher to allow me some leeway to just see what I would find. And at the time, I had started writing about Bertha Parker, but I had no idea how important she was in the development of archaeology in the Southwest. I had no idea she even had a solid part to play. But when I went to the Southwest Museum and started going through Mark Raymond Harrington's papers, that's when I found that they were written in Bertha's handwriting. These were not his field notes, these were her field notes. And so she was this woman who was half Abenaki, part Seneca, had this innate sense of how to identify people and the past. She could walk on to sites and just know where to find certain kinds of artifacts. She just had a very, very refined sense of intuition. And she made a really groundbreaking discovery in the Gypsum Cave in Nevada when she located ancient sloth remains that appeared to be in conjunction with ancient human remains. In her time, in 1930, when this discovery was made, the Southwest Museum saw to it that she was on the front page of newspapers all across the country. Girl archaeologist makes discovery. And so she was recognized in her time. But she's forgotten in later years, in part because her life intersected with Hollywood Indians. Her third husband was Iron Eyes Cody. And so even the knowledge about her important ethnological and archaeological work with the Southwest Museum gets covered over by this artificial division between Native people who are performers, Native people who are intellectuals, Native people who don't fit into those categories neatly. And so I'm also troubling and opening up all of those categories of analysis so that people do not have to be limited in one form of identity in order to make really significant contributions.